Okay, today we're going to talk about solving a system of linear inequalities. So notice that they have inequality signs on both of these. That means there's two or more of them, and they have the same variable. So as we're graphing them, we're going to graph them just as we would graph one inequality. So I'm going to start with the red one, y is greater than 2x. So if I were graphing this, you'll notice that it is in y equals mx plus b form. And since there's no b written there, that's because the b is 0. So the y-intercept is 0. So I'm going to plot that point at 0. And then I'm going to look for the slope, and the slope here is 2, and I'm going to make that into a fraction so I can do rise over run. And 2, since it's a whole number, is going to be over 1. All whole numbers will be over 1. So we have a rise of 2 and a run of 1. So from my y-intercept, I'm going to rise 2 and run 1. Rise 2 and run 1. That's the pattern that's happening. I can go in the other direction. And when I do linear inequalities, I like to go all the way across the graph. Now I have to look at the inequality sign. Since it's greater than, it's going to be a dashed line because it's not equal to. So this is just a boundary line. So we're going to dash that line. It should look like this. So a greater than or a less than is going to be a dashed line. Okay, because it's not equal to, it's just a boundary line. And now we have to look at our shading. So I have to see which half of the graph should be shaded. And in order to do that, I'm going to plug in a point that's not on the graph. And if you notice 0.00, I like to use that point. That's the easiest point to use because math with zeros is easy. But because that's on my line, I cannot use that point. So I'm going to use, let's use the purple here. I'm going to use this point right here, 1, 0. And so I'm going to plug the 1 in for x. I'm going to plug the 0 in for y. And then I'm going to solve. So 2 times 1 is 2. So it looks like this. Oops, that should be a 0. And then I have 0 is greater than 2. That's a false statement. Since that's a false statement, that means that that side where that point is not part of my solution group. So I'm going to highlight the other side. I'm going to just highlight it all the way down so you can see. So these are all my solutions, anything to the left side of that line. Now I'm going to graph the other line. So I'm going to get rid of this here just so we can put the y back. All right. So now when I do this, I'll do this in green since it's Christmas time. We're going to follow the Christmas colors. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to graph this line. Now it's in standard form. So to graph this line, I'm going to find the x and y intercepts. And in order to do that, I plug in 0 for the opposite number. So if I plug in a 0 here for y, if I plug in a 0 here, it would be minus 3 times 0, which would be 0. So that would cancel out. And I would just have 2x is less than or equal to negative 6. And I divide both sides by 2 and get x as negative 3. So I'm going to go over here. My x-intercept, whoops, let's make it green. My x-intercept is negative 3. Okay. Now I'm going to find the y-intercept. And in order to find the y-intercept, that's when x is 0. Whoops. Put that y back in there. And so I'm going to plug in 0 for x. And I'm going to solve for y. So when I do that, that cancels out. And I'm going to divide both sides by negative 3. This isn't really important here, but as we do this, since we're dividing both sides by a negative, we're going to flip the inequality sign. So you can see that the y-intercept is 2. So I'm going to plot the y-intercept on the y-axis. And now I have to look at my inequality sign. So the inequality sign here is less than or equal to. Since it's also equal to, we're going to have a solid line. So I'm going to make this line like this. Whoops. Maybe that's going to disappear. Let me make that line. It's a solid line. Okay. So if I have a greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, it's going to be a solid line. See the difference? The dashed line is not equal to. All right, so a solid line means that anything on that line is a solution. And now I have to find the shading. So again, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to plug in a point that's not on that line. In this case, 0, 0 is not on that line, so I'm going to plug that in. So let's use purple. So I'm going to plug in 0 for X. I'm going to plug in 0 for Y. And I'm going to see if it's a true or a false statement. 2 times 0 is 0, minus 3 times 0, which is 0. So it looks like this. 0 minus 0 obviously is this. Since 0 is not less than or equal to -6, it's not part of my solution group. So that means I'm going to highlight the opposite side. So in green, I'm going to highlight the opposite side. And the solution group is where the green and the red overlap. And that's how you would do solving a system of linear inequalities.